Today, we're covering two major murder cases out of Louisiana. The first case is the shocking arrest of 70-year-old Charles Johnson, who was accused of hiring a hitman to kill his wife Pamela back in 2015. After nearly a decade with no answers, investigators say they finally have the evidence to bring Pamela's killers to justice. The second case is that of 43-year-old Christopher Cater, a man found guilty of murdering 72-year-old Sheila Ortega, the woman who had taken him in when he had nowhere to go. He then drove around with her body in her car for a month before being caught. Both stories expose chilling betrayals and the long road to justice. Let's get into it.
I stand before you today to say that justice finally caught up. 10 years ago, a tragedy struck our community when a life was taken in a senseless act of violence.
Deputies make a third arrest in a murder and kidnapping case that started 9 years ago. 40-year-old John Bolavane Jr. is accused of conspiracy to commit murder.
Hi, my name is Katie Ring, and this is Crime House Daily, your weekday true crime companion. We follow the cases making headlines now, where justice is still unfolding. This is a First Watch episode bringing you today's biggest crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel at Crime House Daily so you never miss an episode. This episode discusses active criminal cases and breaking news. The information we share is based on what's publicly available at the time of recording and may change as new evidence comes to light. We aim to inform, not to decide guilt or innocence, so everyone mentioned is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Okay, before I get into today's main cases, let's talk about something I saw that I need to tell you guys about. Over in Germany, police found a woman who was recently elected as mayor of a small western town, forgive me for everyone who speaks German, called Ortega, with multiple stab wounds down her neck and abdomen. Her name is Iris Stalzer, and she's a mother of two from Germany's Social Democratic Party. As of this recording, she's in critical condition, and what she allegedly told police in an interview at the hospital is troubling. People magazine reports that Iris said her own teenage daughter stabbed her. Mind you, her 17-year-old daughter is the one who called the police to report her stabbing, saying her mom was injured in an armed robbery. Iris's 15-year-old son allegedly also told police that his mom was attacked in a robbery outside their house, but police believe the attack happened inside. Iris had to be airlifted to a hospital, and authorities say that right now, they're not ruling out close family involvement or political motives in her stabbing. Iris was supposed to take office on November 1st, so we'll be watching this case very closely for any updates to her condition, and we'll be on the lookout for word of possible suspects. Make sure to tune in to our coverage of this case on our socials at CrimeHouse 24/7. Our first case today covers the arrest of Charles Johnson, a 70-year-old Louisiana man who was charged last month for hiring a hitman to kill his wife, Pamela Johnson, back in 2015. The alleged gunman, 43-year-old Shannon Robinson, was arrested as well. At the time of Pamela's murder, she and Charles were going through a divorce, and the authorities believe he killed her so he wouldn't lose any property they shared. After a decade-long investigation, prosecutors believe they finally have enough evidence to put Pamela's killers away. Let's get into it. Before 56-year-old Pamela's life was tragically cut short in 2015, she had spent most of her life with her husband, Charles. He was a few years older than her, and they'd gotten married shortly after Pamela graduated from high school. After their wedding, they moved around a lot, exploring the country before settling in Berg, Louisiana, a suburb outside the city of Houma in the southern part of the state. Charles and Pamela quickly build a life together, and eventually they adopt a daughter, Christina. Pamela loves to be a planner for family and church events. She's an extrovert and a people person. If there's any kind of gathering, she wants to be there, and she wants to be in charge. And she has a big heart. Pamela is described as being extremely caring and generous. Pamela is always ready to listen when somebody is going through a tough time. But she rarely, if ever, allows anyone to return the favor. She's secretive about her own struggles, even though she has a community who would be more than willing to help. But one person she can't hide her private life from is her daughter, Christina. Christina later says that growing up, her family could be emotionally distant at times, and that her parents had a lot of fights. But they'd always try to hide these struggles from the outside world. When they were fighting, they'd take separate cars to events, and once there, they'd act as if everything was fine. Despite these struggles, Christina says she had a good childhood. She had to work hard, but her parents always made sure she had everything she needed. After Christina grows up and leaves the nest, Pamela becomes a mother figure to 2 more girls, though it was under tragic circumstances. Pamela had a close friend named Tiffany Pledger, who was struggling with an abusive relationship. And by 2012, things had reached a boiling point between Tiffany and her husband, Kenneth. It's bad enough that Tiffany's worried about the safety of her 2 daughters who are 7 and 3. She files a restraining order against Kenneth, which he violates right away, and is sent to jail. Then as soon as he gets out, he immediately goes after Tiffany again. Kenneth shows up to her house in the middle of the night and breaks in through her bedroom window, and does the unthinkable. He fatally shoots Tiffany 3 times and also kills himself. After this tragedy, Pamela and Charles take the 2 girls into their home. The girls call Pamela their aunt, but her friends say she considers them to be her own daughters. Things are steady for a few years after that, or at least that's how it appeared from the outside. But by August of 2015, Pamela and Charles's marriage had crumbled, and they filed for divorce. While they go through the proceedings, Pamela keeps the house they were living in, along with custody of the girls, and Charles is left to find another home. The whole situation is extremely contentious. Pamela and Charles own 10 rental properties together, and he's taking more than his share of the rent they're collecting on them. And while they're figuring everything out in court, a tragic event changes everything. On the evening of November 30th, 2015, a man breaks into Pamela's house, sometime between 5:50 and 6:15 p.m. He quickly finds Pamela and executes her with a single gunshot wound to the head, then kidnaps the girls, who are now 7 and 10. The assailant puts the kids into Pamela's car and drives into Houma between 6:15 and 6:30 p.m. He pulls over and exits the car, leaving the girls alone in there. They spend a long, terrifying night in the car before they work up the courage to go get help around 8:30 a.m. the next morning. The girls walk up to a woman on the street and tell her they've been kidnapped. They then lead the police to Pamela's car, and officers soon go to Pamela's house and find her body. The girls aren't physically hurt, but the mental trauma they've just been put through is indescribable. In the span of just a few years, they've had their birth mother violently killed, and now Pamela, who is like their adopted mom. The Terrebonne Parish Police have jurisdiction over the case and are quick to start the investigation. The girls got a good look at their kidnapper, who is described as a tall, thin, black man between 25 and 35 years old. While investigators look into possible suspects, Pamela's loved ones are left to grieve her death. Meanwhile, her daughter Christina, who's now 28 and living in Los Angeles, also has to deal with another problem: her legal battle with her dad, Charles. Charles had not contacted his daughter at all after Pamela's murder. Instead, he went to their old house and stole Pamela's clothes, shoes, and jewelry, which should have gone to Christina, who was designated as Pamela's sole heir. The dispute gets dragged into court, where Charles also gets in trouble for withholding the extra rent he'd taken from their rental properties. Despite the situation, Christina doesn't want to speak badly of her dad. In March 2016, she tells the Houma Courier, quote, "He's not perfect by any means, but he's the only dad I've ever known." On the other hand, Charles isn't as kind. When asked for his comment, he says Christina hadn't talked to her parents very much since college, and he says that she's just a, quote, adopted child. But in the end, he agrees to pay Christina $6,000, which is how much he owed Pamela for her share of their rental earnings. Unfortunately, Pamela's murder investigation doesn't go so cleanly. Even with the local authorities doing everything they can to solve her case, the going is slow. But in May of 2022, almost 7 years after Pamela's death, they finally make an arrest. In May of 2022, almost 7 years after the murder of Pamela Johnson, the authorities in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana, announced that two men, 33-year-old George Robinson Jr. and 40-year-old Shannon Robinson, have been arrested and both charged with first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping in relation to her death. The sheriff's office doesn't provide many details, other than saying they received new information in the case and that it remains under investigation. Pamela's loved ones are flooded with emotions when they find out. Her cousin, Connie Johnson, tells the Houma Courier that she couldn't even drive home from work when she learned an arrest had been made. But she also tells the Courier that she thinks there's more to the crime. She doesn't have a lot of details, but she says, quote, "We're more or less happy that we got the two killers. But we really want the payoff person, because we know it was a paid event. This is step one. That's all I can say." The police don't explain how or why they believe someone paid for Pamela to be murdered, and unfortunately, the investigation hits a major roadblock after this. When prosecutors present their evidence to a grand jury, they get denied, and both suspects go free. But the Terrebonne police aren't ready to give up, and 3 years later in 2025, they have another breakthrough. On September 16th, they announced two men are being officially charged with Pamela Johnson's murder. Once again, one of the suspects is Shannon Robinson. But this time, the other man who's arrested is Pamela's husband, Charles Johnson. Shannon and Charles are being charged with first-degree murder and solicitation for murder, and Shannon is also being charged with aggravated kidnapping. They're both being held without bond. The authorities believe that Charles hired Shannon to kill Pamela so he could avoid losing any communal property in the divorce. Even with the two men in custody, the investigation is still ongoing, which means a lot of details are still being withheld. When asked if the previous suspect, George Robinson Jr., is still under suspicion, the sheriff says, quote, "I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no." And he adds that they'll probably be making additional arrests. He's quickly proven right. Just a few days later, on September 19th, police arrest a 40-year-old man named John Bonvillain Jr. and charge him with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. And the sheriff says there could still be more arrests to come. Since the investigation is ongoing, the authorities are keeping information close to their chest. So the details on Bonvillain's involvement in the case have yet to be revealed. As of this recording, no one else has been taken into custody, but with how quickly things are moving, things could change soon. We'll be monitoring the situation and we'll bring you all of the major updates. For today's second case, we're covering a shocking crime involving a man named Christopher Cater of Lake Charles, Louisiana. In 2023, Cater murdered an elderly woman named Sheila Ortega, a woman who'd taken him in when he had nowhere to go. He then proceeded to drive around with her body in her car for a month before being arrested. A few weeks ago, the 43-year-old was finally found guilty of first-degree murder. And just a few days ago, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. We'll have to see what happens on appeal, but for now, let's go back to the beginning. This all happened in Lake Charles, Louisiana, a bustling city close to the Texas border. Sheila Ortega was well known among her friends for being a caring and generous soul. At 72, she was enjoying a quiet life. She loved gardening, cooking, and spending time with her family. She had 3 daughters, 10 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. She was also an animal lover and often provided a foster home for dogs. There are conflicting details on how Sheila knew Christopher. One account says they may have met through a past job, but however they were acquainted, Sheila was always ready to help others. So when Christopher loses his job in the summer of 2023, Sheila lets him stay in her house until he can figure things out. Christopher would later tell the police, quote, "I'm an alcoholic, I'm a liar, I'm a con artist, the worst of the worst. And from the beginning of his time with Sheila, he lives up to his own assessment of himself. At one point, Christopher takes Sheila's credit cards and starts using them without her permission. When Sheila finds out, she's extremely upset. She even texts him, "I will never trust another human being again. I have laid down my life financially for you." So things are definitely tense in the house. And on June 21st, 2023, the situation takes a dark turn. That day, security footage from Sheila's home shows the two of them heading out in Sheila's car. That evening, when the car comes back, Christopher is the only one who gets out. Throughout that night, he frequently comes up to the car and opens the passenger door to look inside. And the thing he was looking at is Sheila's body. He had murdered her with his bare hands, beating her and fracturing her neck, spine, and face. Later on, Christopher claims he didn't know that he'd killed her until he woke up the next day with blood on his face, hands, and arms. He says he was drunk, he doesn't remember how he'd killed her, and that he only remembers flashes from that night. But he says he remembers why he killed her, and his explanation is hardly believable. After Christopher Cater killed Sheila Ortega on June 21st, 2023, he later claims that he can't remember how he'd killed her. But according to Christopher, he knows why he did. He claims they were getting drunk together and Sheila made a sexual pass at him. Then he became furious and blacked out. But his behavior in the aftermath of Sheila's murder doesn't line up with that story, because later searches of his internet history show all of the following phrases Googled that night, some right after the murder. Things like, does bleach kill DNA? Does the insanity defense work in murder cases? Does the state of Louisiana have the death penalty? Missing persons reports. Does it hurt when you get shot to death? Does life start over after we die? Best ways to get rid of a body. How to dispose of a body. And last but not least, he searched where to find call girls. Christopher later tells police that he knew right away that he would go to jail for what he'd done, but that doesn't stop him from trying to steal as much money as he can in the meantime. He maxes out the rest of Sheila's cards and starts driving around casually in her car. All the while, her body is still in the passenger seat. He put her upside down with her head under the dash and her feet up on the seat. I can only imagine how terrible this must have smelled. Christopher says he thought about disposing of her body, but he never got around to it. He's been stealing Sheila's identity to take out 3 different loans. He also uses her iWallet account to request money from people she knows, many of whom send the money thinking Sheila needs it. And as the days turn to weeks, he keeps her decomposing body in the car the entire time. To try to disguise the smell, he uses baking soda, almost a dozen cans of fresheners, Axe body spray, and bleach. This works about as well as you'd expect. One local bartender recalls Christopher coming in during this time, and in her words, quote, "I have never smelled anything like that before." After a month of this, Sheila's family is starting to worry because no one has heard from her. So on August 15th of 2023, they call the Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Department. The police go to Sheila's house to check in, but no one's home. The car isn't in the driveway and nothing appears to be wrong with the house. Her family tries to get a hold of her for a few more days, but when they can't, they file a missing persons report on the 20th. Police put out a call for license plate readers around the city to watch for her car, and that night they get a hit. Around 8 p.m., a police deputy spots Sheila's car and pulls Christopher over. Christopher tells the officer that he's seen Sheila recently and he's just borrowing her car. Somehow, the officer doesn't notice Sheila's body in the front seat and lets Christopher go. And the police do later say that they were working to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. But even though Christopher gets away in that moment, he's still on the authorities' radar. The next day, August 21st, a sergeant named William Wilcox calls Christopher. This time, Christopher claims he'd just seen Sheila and that he'd driven her up to Arkansas to stay at a friend's house. He also tells Wilcox that he's out of town driving to Houston, Texas. Wilcox immediately calls Christopher out. He tells him they'd caught Sheila's license plate on various readers throughout the city and that they know he's lying. And before long, police locate Sheila's car in a mall parking lot. As soon as they open it, they're hit with the smell of decomposition. Sheila's body is still there in the passenger seat. They know Christopher is an alcoholic, so they just check the nearest bar and immediately find him. He tells the arresting officers, quote, "I guess you found Sheila's car. I guess you know what's inside." He confesses everything right away and says he'd been expecting to get caught since he killed her. He tells them, quote, "It was a feeling of relief when the handcuffs were placed on me. But even with this confession, it takes some time to prepare for court." Around 2 years later, the trial begins on September 16th, 2025. Christopher's attorney argues that the system is to blame for failing Christopher, that he was at the point where he needed help and there was no safety net for him. He says that Christopher didn't mean to kill Sheila, so first-degree murder isn't an appropriate charge. He says, quote, "When we age, stuff breaks down. It's easy to get injured. Yes, he struck her, but she was vulnerable. He didn't mean to kill her." And Christopher's lawyer also calls his client's mental health into question, emphasizing that Christopher had left Sheila's body in the car for 30 days. Prosecutor Jacob Johnson doesn't agree with this. Johnson says, quote, "Are his actions bizarre? Yes. Are they insane? No. Who doesn't know right from wrong but has the sanity to search Google?" Ultimately, the jury sides with Johnson. On September 18th, 2025, they take just over an hour to find Christopher Cater guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, identity theft, and unlawful disposal of remains. During Christopher's sentencing on October 7th, he's sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So for now, he'll be spending his life behind bars, unless something changes on appeal. But hopefully, Sheila Ortega's loved ones are taking comfort knowing that her killer is being held accountable for his crimes. If we learn about any developments, we'll be sure to let you know. What did you think of today's cases? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments. See you next time. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Crime House Daily and follow us on social media at Crime House 24/7 for real-time updates, because the pursuit of justice never stops.